Hey, what's going on? Welcome to another episode of AngularAir. I'm your host, Justin Schwarzenberger, and on today's episode, we are going to learn about the latest and greatest with Angular Universal. See what's going on with that most recently. Looking forward to it. Let's say hi to our panelists, then we'll meet our guests, and then we'll get right into the content. All right, joining us today, we've got Bonnie with us. Bonnie, what's going on?
Whole lot of nada. Good to be here. I'm very excited about the show today.
Awesome. Glad to have you. Hey, is your plant getting bigger back there? Is it growing?
You know, you're the only one who noticed, Justin, because I had one in the bedroom and I had one in my office, and the one in my office was not doing, because apparently you can kill a plant with love. Well, we call it drowning. Well, I learned that, and so
we call it drowning.
Samantha said, I know how the plant feels because I love it so much it's dying. Anyway, so the one in my bedroom was doing really well, and the one in here, so I swapped them so that I could, and anyway, so, yeah, but you're the only one who called me out on it, so good catch, Justin.
All right. It's looking healthy. It's surviving. That's good. It's more than my plants.
It's not drowned.
Mike's with us. Mike, what's going on?
Mute button. I'm capable of clicking on it. Twice. Once to mute, once to unmute.
Okay. Can you say hi?
Hi.
There we go.
How's everybody doing? Ready for another show?
Awesome. Alyssa's with us. Alyssa, what's going on?
Oh, hello, darling. So good to be here.
It feels so festive.
Your intro's so sophisticated. I love it. I feel like we're just going to get into some deep intellectual thought. It's great.
I noticed you didn't call me sophisticated.
Everybody's intro was very sophisticated. I just, yeah, it was.
Button clicking, my man.
Thanks for keeping me honest and on track. Appreciate it.
It's because everybody's on their best behavior tonight because we have such a distinguished guest.
We do. Do you want to introduce our guest, Bonnie?
I'm actually very excited about this. And I've known this guy for a while, and I ran into him at a conference, and I twisted his arm and convinced him to come on, and I'm very excited about it. You guys say hello to Vikram. Vikram, I'm excited to have you on the show, but I don't remember your last name.
Nobody remembers my last name. Vikram Subramanian.
There you go. That was very good. That's much better to see. I didn't even try to say it.
Yeah.
And so tell us, I'm going to let you tell us what you're coming on the show to talk about, which actually is like you were talking about at the time when you were working on it, and now you're working on something else, but you're still coming to
Yes. So, hi, I'm Vikram. I was a software engineer in the Angular team. I worked on Angular Universal and tooling most recently. I switched to something, some other team in Google, but I still wanted to come here and this is my first Angular after I left the team. I wanted to talk about what we did new in Angular Universal 9. There's like a whole bunch of things that different people did. I just coordinated, so I just wanted to talk about it so that we can showcase all the work done by our wonderful team and community. So I'm really excited to show off all the things that's new in Angular Universal 9.
Very cool. Very cool. What should we give viewers a primer of what Angular Universal is, or were you planning on doing that?
Okay, so Angular Universal is essentially the server-side rendering solution for Angular. It has multiple parts. Angular Universal as a project is essentially a community-driven collection of tools, which makes it easier for you to build like an Express engine-based server-side rendering or Happy-based. So these are tools that essentially people from the community contribute to, but we want to provide like an official spot where it's curated by the Angular team in some ways, and make it easier for people to use them. And it's well integrated with the Angular CLI and things like that. The other part is the platform server API itself, and that is part of Angular core, while Angular Universal is essentially all the set of tools and utilities that makes it easier for people to do server-side rendering using the platform server API.
And so why would we want to do server-side rendering for our Angular apps?
So there are primarily three reasons. The number one reason why most of our users want it is for a better SEO. There are crawlers like Google crawlers which do like execute your JavaScript and can get your content from there. But there are also other crawlers which might not be able to crawl the content behind your Angular application, or it might even take the Google crawler some time to get to your content if it is just JavaScript. So what server-side rendering does is it essentially takes your Angular application and renders it in its full form HTML that can be then more easily crawled by the Google bot. I have to add a note there saying it's not that Angular apps by default are not indexable by bots, but I would look at it more from perspective of quality of the SEO. Doing server-side rendering or pre-rendering is definitely more work for you. This is more like if you are willing to put in that more work, you can get more quality out of your SEO. Right, so that's the number one reason why most people use server-side rendering. The second reason is faster load, perceived faster load performance. So it's definitely faster, like first contentful paint. So since the page is rendered on the server, and instead of just sending you like something like, hey, this is my app, just that tag and a bunch of JavaScript, it actually expands out on the server all the HTML contents of your app and sends it. So the time like it takes for you to see like your main content is much shorter in Angular Universal. These are the two primary reasons why people choose to use server-side rendering. Yeah.
And then does like the social sharing fall into that as well, in terms of if I wanted to share a link to my site and share it on Facebook or Twitter, and I wanted it to pre-fill the kind of the information?
Yes. So it also helps with like things like if you want to share like a Twitter or Facebook link to a deep link URL into your app. We can those. I don't know what's the current status of those crawlers. Maybe they are improving. But when we started the Universal project, there definitely needed help from like doing server-side rendering to fill all the meta tags that would then inform those social link crawlers to also provide a better preview of the content in your page.
Cool. Very cool. All right, I think that kind of wraps up the what is Universal, right, and why we want to use it. So what's new?
Cool. So let me present. So we have a whole bunch
show us some stuff.
Yes.
Can you share your screen with us?
I
want to see it, Vikram.
All right, I'm sharing it. Justin, can you switch over to it?
Yep, got it. Looks good.
All right, cool. So as everybody know, Angular 9 is out. Yay. And we did a bunch of stuff for Angular Universal for the 9.0 release. And I mean, of course, the number one feature in Angular Universal 9 is it's compatible with Ivy. So we did a whole bunch of stuff, starting from the CLI and how we generate the code. This is mostly around the switch between like you no longer reference ng module factories in your code, but you reference ng module, and Ivy enabled Angular essentially is able to use that instead of factories. So it makes the generated code much simpler. It also generates lesser code so that you don't have to generate the factories and your build is faster. So we needed to adjust all the universal side of things to use the modules instead of factories and get things working out of the box. The second one is a minor feature, but it's sort of I like it because we used to get a lot of like bug reports from people who are easily like confused by it. It's much easier to add server-side rendering to an existing Angular project now. Previously, it required like extra parameters and things like that. Now it can guess like what your default project is and easily upgrade it to server-side rendering project. The third one is the exciting addition is dev server. So currently, in a client-side only Angular application, you essentially do ng-serve, and it's watching your project, and when you change something, it can rebuild and live reload your code. This was good, but once you enable server-side rendering, you didn't get the whole loop as part of your development experience before. You could just still do ng-serve and do all your fast editing, but people were still like hitting issues that are server-side rendering specific that they wanted as part of their development workflow as well. So now the new dev server builder lets you do that. So we'll look into how that works. And the last one is we have pre-rendering out of the box with all the like the discussions around Jamstack. People are essentially want to pre-render their application and their routes, but not necessarily during request time, but they want to do it ahead of time during build time, right? This has a lot of different advantages, but I think it's more around like convenience and the cost of hosting. Like you don't have to host an actual server to get the performance benefits, but you can pre-render all the routes during build time, and you can deploy it as static HTMLs, and you would get better performance. It'll actually, it's even better performance than server-side rendering in one aspect, in the sense that when you pre-render during build time, your time to first byte is actually much smaller than if you actually had a server running and responding to the server-side rendering request.
What is time to first byte? I feel silly asking that, but
so it's a browser performance.
Very good question, Alyssa.
All right, so it's a browser performance metric that essentially ties to how fast your page starts getting sent to the browser, because there are a bunch of things on the like the HTML header, which the browser is capable of processing parallelly. Like it can start downloading scripts and fonts and things like that. But until you actually send those things over to the browsers, it can't start any of those things. So time to first byte, I think, is essentially a way to see, like, irrespective of where your user is accessing your site from, if you can get those initial bytes more quickly to your user, the browser can then do its job much faster. So that's why that metric is important.
They have a lot of metrics, don't they, as far as performance? I know I was using Leonardo's Perfume.js, and he has a bunch of built-in performance metrics, but that's actually probably one of the best as far as measuring the performance. Like you focus on that one, and you can really get an idea of how well it's
so like all browser dev tools will have that, because I've heard of like first contentful paint, but not time to first byte. So they are different, right?
Yeah, they are different. Yes. So again, time to first byte lets you know how well your CDN is actually set up, and It is important because a longer time indicates that if the content of your app is not properly distributed on the edge, like on CDNs and stuff like that, and so your browser can't start doing its job early enough, right? So if you had a bunch of, even if you put all the work in deferring all your JavaScript and things like that, you wouldn't get those benefits unless you can send those first bytes quickly. So
Okay.
I would say it's not the only metric that's important, but it's like a trade-off, right? Because you could, it's an important metric to note because people might rely too heavily on doing server-side rendering, while it might improve their time to contentful paint. If it's going to hurt their time to first byte, that's something you need to balance so that you get a better overall performance for your user, right?
Okay. Thank you for explaining that, Vikram. I love it.
Yeah.
Hey, Vikram, I think we don't want to sidetrack you too much because Tobias and Konstantin have some very specific questions in the YouTube chat. And I don't want to throw them in here and sidetrack you because they're so specific, but it would be really cool if we have time at the end to circle back around to them.
Sure.
Because they're good questions.
All right. So I'll just go on with this presentation?
Yeah, we'll try not to interrupt you.
Can I say one more thing on the pre-rendering really quick too?
Yeah.
The server-side rendering is there's the request from the browser to that endpoint, and then the server is going to do some work, right? And then it's going to return back the result from the request. In pre-rendering, the idea is that it's already done on the server side. So when that request is made from the browser, that page comes back with content right away. It's requesting the file, right? So I think that's that concept of time to byte versus having the server to do some work before it returns anything back to the browser from the initial stuff.
Yeah, so it's that, plus if you had a static HTML, it's much easier to distribute it across the globe on CDNs on the edge, much closer to the user, right? So the bytes travel much faster to the user that way. So that way also it's better. I mean, again, I want to say that it's not like server-side rendering is much slower. Like you could have a setup in your cloud provider in a way that it can cache the first response from your server in a CDN, right? And from the second response on, you would almost get the experience of doing pre-rendering, right? But it is definitely more overhead to maintain and deploy and monitor your servers and things like that, right? Something that not everybody might be willing to do. So that's why pre-rendering is also an important option. And one of the reasons why we want to add it as part of Universal is we want to provide the people the choice to choose between the different strategies. And even within a single app, they are able to choose between these routes are pre-rendered because there might be my landing marketing page, while these sites are more user-specific and I want them to be request time server-side rendered or somewhere in between, right? So I want this page to be pre-rendered, but I have a million of these pages, so I don't want to increase my build time. So it might be easier to server-side render on first request and then cache on CDN, right? So all this work enables our users to have a more nuanced serving strategy, right? So does it make sense?
Awesome. Thank you.
All right. So the first one is easier to add. Again, this might seem silly, but again, this is something that's just the initial friction. We want to remove it. Previously, you had to provide when you're enabling server-side rendering or universal on your project, you had to always provide your client project name, and this was always tripping up the new users. But now in the newest schematic, it can guess your default project and add. So that's one of the things. Second is how do you run the dev server once you've added universal? it's essentially just a simple dev :SSR npm command, and it'll start a live reload environment, but going through your server-side rendering server, right? And the third is just showing how to run the pre-rendering. Again, here we wanted to make it as frictionless as possible. So you can run it as just npm run pre-render, and the pre-rendering builder will actually try to guess all the routes in your application using your routing module configuration, right? But it can guess only as so far as those routes are statically guessable. So the second command is when you have like dynamic route parameters in your routing config, and there's no way to know, like, hey, is it going to be /ID/100 or 1000 or what? Like, it might depend on data in your database and things like that. So in those cases, we provide an option for you to probably run a script separately and produce, like, hey, these are the list of the dynamic routes. So the pre-rendering builder can combine all the statically guessed routes with the dynamic routes. So I'll show it in the demo. So switching to the demo. So essentially for the demo, I have the tour of heroes, which the Angular.io goes through in its tutorial. Can you see it? Should I make it bigger?
So I know they used to go through it. Is it still available somewhere on the site? Do you guys know? Because I know they have a whole new getting started process that doesn't involve Tour of Heroes.
I think Tour of
still
Heroes.
available.
It is?
Yeah.
Somewhere.
Cool.
I think that one is still available.
I love that you use the Tour of Heroes for this, Vikram, because it's code that we're already, so we can compare because we already kind of know this code, or we can go and look at it.
Mm-hmm.
It's really nice.
Yeah. So essentially, what I have here is the Tour of Heroes app downloaded, and I already ran ng-add at nguniversal/express engine. I'm not going to do that. It's going to take a bunch of time downloading the npms and stuff like that. So I'm just going to start from the state where the express engine is already added. So the ng-add schematics does a bunch of things. So I'm going to just quickly go through what all it did. So if you essentially open your package.json, in addition to your existing ng commands, it added these 4 here. Is the font size okay?
Yeah, I think that's good.
Okay, so the dev SSR is your new dev server target. And serve and build are for you to do production build and serving of your production version of your server-side rendering, and pre-render is the new pre-rendering builder. So let's do the dev server first. So this is the ng-add. I'm not going to go through that.
And these are part of the the builder stuff for the CLI?
Yes. So these are actually using the architect API to add new builders. So actually, let me just show that part also. So Serve SSR is essentially the new dev server Angular CLI builder. And it's not too much configure. It essentially says what your browser and server target. These are automatically set by the ng-add command, so you don't have to do anything here. So it essentially runs some things in production mode so that you get something closer to production, but it does build your client bundles and server bundles in development mode so that the build turnaround time is much faster. So this is the dev server builder it'll add, and the other builder it adds is the pre-render builder. So again, it just sets the slash, like your default route as the only route to pre-render. We'll see how to configure these things. So these are the two new sections that Angular Universal 9.0 adds to your project, and it also adds this like easier way to invoke them in package.json. So now if I run the dev server, it's essentially doing a build of your client in watch mode and a build of your server in watch mode in one after the other. And then it will say it's ready when it's done. And when you change anything, it will again do both of them and refresh the browser automatically. Hopefully, if the demo works. It should work. Things are slow because I'm on my Chrome OS laptop. It'll be much better on your regular laptop.
We believe in you, Vikram. You got this.
All right. And
it is a little harder when you're live on YouTube, but don't worry.
All right.
So then the architect and the builder, like the server to serverless is all part of that, right? We don't actually end up with any like server files inside of our project or anything as a result.
Oh, no, you do. Those were always the case before also. Okay, let me clarify. You don't get extra files for the dev server builder or the pre-render builder, right? But we do write the file for your server entry point for your SSR on disk, because we think different people might have wanted to configure their server differently. And we can't handle all of those combinations from within our project. So actually, if you look at, so we do write one file. This was always the case before also, where essentially we provide you the entry point for the Express engine, but with everything set up so that server-side rendering works out of the box. So you don't have to do anything, but there might be some certain cases where you want to have like your own middleware set up here, or your own separate way of handling 404s and things like that. So this is actually the only server-specific file we write on disk and expose to our users. But everything we generate for the dev server and the pre-render builder are all done in memory, and nothing is written to disk. So looks like it completed. So I'm just going to start from the beginning. Oops. Oh no. I typed the wrong port. All right, so this is the server-side rendered version of your project running in dev mode, right? So just to show you that it's all server-side rendered. I could have done view source or slow. So if you look at the HTML that's sent, it's actually the full HTML, right? So if you look at here, all the styles are pre-rendered and pre-filled, which is very cool. And then if you look at the actual body, it has the whole content actually filled here. So, and since this is in dev mode, it has some extra comments for debugging, but in your actual production mode, you wouldn't see these extra ng reflect if and things like that. These are because it's running in dev mode. So yeah, so that's the dev server. So let me go ahead and make a change. So let me. I just want to call out one thing. So the way a regular server-side rendered Angular application works is we use server-side rendering for the first initial render of your page, right? So whichever page you landed on first will be server-side rendered. So if I came here first, at this point, it's server-side rendered, but it is also downloading the client bundle. And by now, it has bootstrapped your client app on top of this. So when you do a route change, it's all client side from now on, right? So when I'm actually doing this, it's actually doing client side route change, and everything from here on is the client side app, right? So if I'm in this page, right? But when I press refresh, it's essentially going to load the server-side rendered version of this page, because that is sort of the first page that we ask this browser to load. So I'm going to come here and essentially make a change. The details. The rebuild will be much faster because the caches for the builders are a little warm, but still takes a little bit of time on my Chromebook. All right. So it did the incremental build. And it's going to say compilation successful. Anytime
Like,
soon.
why is my back starting to hurt? And then I realized I was leaned forward, like on the edge of my seat, waiting for this to build.
So,
It's cool, guys. It's cool. It's going to be fine. It's just interesting.
It has essentially finished compilation, and when it says compile successfully, there's a live reload like triggering, which essentially has now gotten this browser to trigger, and for some reason the browser is also slow. I think because we are doing the whole streaming, everything on my computer is slow.
Yeah, because you're streaming on this Chromebook as well, right?
Yes.
All right. Push it to the limit.
The little Chromebook that could.
Yeah, we believe in you, Chromebook.
It's spinning. So the live reload started. Yes. All right. I'm just going to interrupt at this point. All right. So we got the extra exclamation. So this is a much shorter turnaround cycle for our server-side rendering users. Previously, they had to do a full production build, stop the server, start the server, and things like that. But with the dev server builder, they can immediately, they can almost have an ng-serve kind of experience. So.
And you had to set up your own HTTP server on your development side, right, to launch it, right? This is all coming out of the box. We got the
yes.
Yeah,
this is now out of the box. Yeah.
Very cool.
And if you have something like Nest.js, they have all of these integrated with there, so that if you change anything in the backend API, it refreshes. So it all works well together.
And so the stuff that's out of the box right now support, it's just for a node server. Is that correct? In terms of let's say I wanted to use .NET as my server-side renderer, right? Is there a way I can plug that in and do that here? Or is it just for Node right now in terms of
for now, it's just the Node Express engine and Happy engine. But yeah, we'd have to work with Microsoft to get the .NET Core working the same way.
But the cool thing is that you're using the architect and the builders for the CLI. So theoretically down the road, we just add a new one for that, swap it out. The infrastructure for our CLI project is still the same. We don't have something special for that case. We just need to pop the right thing in there.
Yes, that's
pretty cool.
All right, so that is the dev server. How are we doing on time?
We're a little over halfway through. So
all right.
We don't have to worry too much about questions. Well, we have some more questions, but Christian and Justin are dropping knowledge in the chat. So by the time you're done, probably Christian's already answered all the questions. So.
All right, cool. So the next part is pre-render. So I just want to show what happens if you just run pre-render by default. So for that.
And this is where you were saying it's going to guess the routes, try and guess the routes automatically for us.
Yeah. So let's look at what the route config looks like, right? So you have like the default path going to dashboard, and there's a dashboard, and there is a detail which is the one you get when you click on one of the heroes. And this is one which we saw in the live reload. It has this like parameter, right? ID parameter, which makes the route dynamic. While dashboard, heroes, and the default route are static. So when you run the pre-render without any other options, it essentially sets up pre-rendering for just the routes which it can guess statically. So in this case, it's the 3 routes / dashboard and heroes, right? So what it does is it writes out the HTML as part of your browser dist folder, so that now when you even do ng deploy to any of the cloud providers that you have, you can statically get all the benefits of pre-rendering without having to run the server, right? So again, this is out of the box. It should work for you. Either that, or you might have to adjust the config in your ng deploy builder to point to the pre-render target instead of the regular browser target, right? So once you do that, it's as if, and you do ng deploy, it will actually run the pre-render step for you automatically and deploy the pre-rendered files. So here this builder is doing a production build since we are writing out all the production assets. So it'll do a production build of your browser, production build of your server, and then run that on all the routes it can guess, and then produce the output into the browser dist folder. So
now, does that also look through LazyLoaded routes as well?
Yes.
And is that dependent upon using the import statement, the new way to do the LazyLoaded routes? Right?
Yeah. Yes.
Okay.
So you didn't have to do.
Wasn't that something that was really difficult at one point to lazy load, like pre-rendered? Like that's like you could lazy load it or you could pre-render it, but you can't have both.
All right.
And now apparently you can.
Yes.
Look how far we've come, you guys.
So one of the things that I said the schematics is also better is essentially the bit here. It's a small bit, but it's useful. And I'm looking at the wrong file. Sorry. All right. So this bit here, by default, you would only have in a CLI project a router module for root routes. But when you enable server-side rendering, it adds this extra flag. Initial navigation is enabled. What this does is essentially handle the case where you said like lazy loaded routes, right? So the problem with lazy loaded routes is if you didn't have this flag, you would see a flicker for lazy loaded routes on your browser, because your server has already fully rendered your lazy loaded route. But on the client, when it bootstraps on top of that and it takes over the page, it renders up to the router outlet. But when it sees the lazy loaded route, it would start fetching that chunk, and then by the time it would have actually erased the page below the router outlet. And then when the lazy loaded route is again loaded on the client, it would re-render all of them, causing that even if it happens quickly, you would see a visible flicker. And this is one of the main causes for flicker on server-side rendering, the lazy loaded route. So now in 9.0, when you do ng add, ng universal, anything, it will also add this parameter so that you don't fall into that bit. So
very nice.
And so the pre-rendering is done. It guessed these three, it writes them as just simple index.html files. So that now if I do HTTP server, like if I just have a static server just to show, like, how do I copy this? All right, I just stop the server. So this is on a different endpoint for the static server. So that's it. You're like, and so you have like now a statically pre-rendered version of your website. Again, if I say view page source, you can see that the thing sent by the server is all the styles actually inlined, which is also good for like performance, and all like the HTML content of your application actually pre-rendered, right? And now you can deploy this to Firebase or like cloud or AWS, wherever, and you essentially have like a pre-rendered version of your application, right? So it'll make like the initial load much faster. So that's pre-rendering. So now we were able to pre-render only the static routes, right? So if you went into a route like this, of course, this is a client-side route change. So if I did this, it's going to say, hey, I don't know how to actually render because we just have like a static web server, which doesn't reroute it back to the slash. So let's render all the dynamic routes also, right? So in order to do that, I already created a text file called routes.txt. Essentially, it's just a list of all the dynamic links in your application, right? You could create this using a script by maybe if these are IDs in a database, you can write a script to query your database during build time, and then create this routes.txt list and then call the pre-rendered builder, right? So to invoke it, right? So it's the same npm pre-render, but there's an extra like routes file parameter, which will now pre-render all the routes in your application. Again, it's going to take a little bit of time. It's going to do all the whole production build from the beginning on my Chromebook. All right, maybe we can take a question while this thing is happening.
Yeah, so if you're doing this pre-render, right, and you had the error, the 404 error because somebody went to that route that wasn't pre-rendered, like then what's the pattern of combining it where you have some pages that are pre-rendered and some that are not?
Yeah, so since I had just a local static server, it was showing you like, hey, this path is not found. But if you actually deployed it to your like cloud provider, it would set like if a default ng deploy on Firebase will redirect all routes to the to your base of your client application route. So if you went to a route that doesn't exist, it will actually serve your client application from just slash, and the Angular client application can then parse the extra route parameters to display the 404 page you have set in the router config. Does it make sense?
Yep, cool. Thanks.
Yeah. So again, our idea here is to eventually provide like a SSR solution where you can mix in your own application a combination of pre-rendering, request time server-side rendering, and client-side rendering, right? So just by tweaking all these settings and deploying it to your cloud provider, you can get that experience.
We're at 60%.
I think it's doing the ES 2015 build and the ES5 build and then the server build, so it takes a little bit of time.
And this is with Angular 9, right? So the builds are even faster now?
Yes.
if we were on Angular 8 on this little Chromebook, we might be waiting even longer.
None of this would work.
It's really cool to see all the stuff we get out of the box with like ng add right now to do all this stuff. Is going to be amazing. Having gone through the process before, which was still totally doable, right? It was just a lot of manual steps that you'd have to do to add universal or pre-render to your project. Now we get it pretty straightforward. It's just pretty awesome.
Yeah. So now it actually pre-rendered 13 routes. So it combine all the statically guessed routes with whatever you provide in your routes file. So now if I did this, detail 12, hey, now it's serving the pre-rendered version.
And I missed, was there a command to serve the pre-render out of the box, right?
No.
Or did you have to, go ahead.
So I'm just using a static HTTP server here. Yeah, there is no command to run the pre-rendering before this. So there are a few options. I would say actually your experience using server-side rendering or pre-rendering while you're doing development shouldn't matter. So for development, I would recommend just using the dev server. Even for routes, you're going to pre-render in production, right? So that will be your development setup. And for production, I would essentially say you deploy your instance as part of your CI, deploy a test instance of your production app in your cloud. It's easier to do that these days. You can deploy how many instances that you want, and then you get the live version of how your website is going to look with the pre-rendering for some pages and server-side rendering for some pages. So the only other minor thing I want to mention is we also do all the pre-rendering like in as many parallel processes as possible. So if you actually had an application, somebody actually posted on Twitter, like they had like 10,000 routes just in the test application, and it took like something like 75 seconds to pre-render all of them. Which is not bad, which is good. So, and that is possible because it uses all the processes on your machine to like parallelly pre-render all your routes. So that's it. Just a couple of more slides. Demo. I just want to like thank everybody who worked on this project. I have been just a coordinator on this project. Alan from the Angular CLI team did a bulk of like making it work on Ivy and getting it to like work with the rest of Angular 9.0. That a lot of bug fixes and also like easier ng add. Manfred built all the builder stuff for the dev server. He's like our community champion. He builds a lot of things for us. So the dev server is his work. Adam Plumer has been a long-time Universal contributor. He has been maintaining Angular Universal externally for the past few versions. And for this version, he built the part where I showed it automatically adds the initial navigation enable part of the schematics. And Wagner Maciel was our engineering resident for the fall. So he's like a super intern who's like in his path to transition to a full-time Google employee. And this was his project, essentially. So he did everything for the pre-render builder from scratch, making it work on the different engines and doing the parallelization and integrating with like the guess parser to guess your routes and all those things. So big thanks to all of them. And I've uploaded the sample at GitHub, and for general server-side rendering, we have the Angular.io guide. So that's it.
Awesome. I have one more quick question, if we can. Is there any other things that we need to worry about in terms of before, there was talk of, or you have to think about like what DOM elements, what things can I use? Could I use the window object and things like that in terms of my code for when I go to SSR?
Mhm.
Are those things still in play? Anything like that?
Yes. So we made certain things better past few versions. So I think starting from Angular 5 or 6, I think we switched from using the parse 5 DOM implementation on the server to something called Domino. And Domino provides a lot of, it's still a subset of the DOM APIs, but it does provide a lot of the DOM APIs in terms of like getting the children. And so there are, even in Angular material, there are code which directly access the DOM. And we have been able to get that to work with server-side rendering, right? Essentially using Domino. So that makes it easier, but there are still two pitfalls. One, you cannot use the global document object. There is a document token in @Angular/common that essentially provides you the instance of the document for that particular server-side request. Because on a server, you can have multiple requests happening at the same time. You don't want like a global variable like crossing streams. So you would have to take care to essentially inject the document object every time. And the second is you cannot use window, right? So you would have to stub it in some way. And there are a couple of ways people do it. Our recommended way is to provide use Angular's dependency injection to essentially hide any part of your code that is using a window to make it like a client module. So you would have the client version load on the client side. On the server version, you would probably just have stubs that doesn't do anything. So you would include that client module in your app module and the server version in the app server module to override it. So that is our recommended way. The other way people do is they have custom Webpack config to switch the server implementation. We don't recommend that because we want everything to go through properly to Angular CLI and not have custom Webpack config. The other thing with Angular 9.0 Universal is there was a custom Webpack config we were exposing. That is gone now. So it's much cleaner now. And we don't expose you extra Webpack knobs for your server build and stuff like that. So things work out of the box and much better.
Awesome. A lot of stuff to unpack and start trying out. It's very cool. Very cool. All right. Well, we're at the top of the hour. So why don't we do a few picks if our panelists have any picks, and then we'll wrap it up. I didn't even ask earlier if our panelists have any picks. Bonnie?
I didn't, but now I do.
Okay.
But listen, okay, you want me to go first?
Yeah, I'll have you go first.
Okay, my pick tonight is actually our chat because we have such cool people in our chat tonight on YouTube, and I just want to say hi to all of them. We have Kate Sky tonight, who is my new friend from Twitter. Either she's never been in the chat before or she never actually participated in the chat before, but she's there. We also have Jeffrey Bosch, my neighbor, my Netherlander neighbor. And we have Reactive Fox, you guys, who is a brand new GDE as of like an hour ago, literally. And he is also, if you didn't know, his name is Andrew, and he is the host of AngularAir Russia. And he's also in our chat. So, and then there was Christian, Constantine, and Tobias, who were like totally nerding out over universal stuff and answering each other's questions. But the chat tonight was hopping, and I just want to say I love all of you. And thank you for joining us and participating. It's really great to see everybody. Sarun, who we've seen before, it's great to see the familiar faces and then the new faces, and just hi, everybody.
I love it. Now you get to wear another title. Now you're a chat advocate for AngularAir. So now because you did such an amazing job of that, yeah, you can be the one.
It's such an honor. I want to thank the Academy. Thank you for my parents. Thank you, everybody. I get a hat now, chat advocate.
Nice.
Love it.
Nice.
And we are going to do a crossover, right, Justin, of with Reactive Fox and
Oh, that'd be
AngularAir Russia.
cool.
We're
Yeah,
gonna
we
do a
need to plan
crossover
that, for
episode.
sure.
We're going to get that on the calendar.
All right, for sure.
So my pick, I landed at like, I think it was midnight 30 last night, coming home from Flashback Conf. And it was in Orlando, Florida. It was a really cool conference. It was so cool to see like some of my old friends out there in Orlando. And I just wanted to give a shout out to the organizer, Brian Rinaldi. He did a really cool job just bringing together the community. And so, yeah, shout out to his passion.
Very cool. Very cool. All right. That's it. Vikram, hey, thanks a ton for coming on and sharing your time and sharing this content. We really, really appreciate it. Thank you.
Cool. Thanks a lot for having me.
Yeah, and sorry it took so long to get you on here, even though, like now you're done with the Angular team, but now you're on. But
I'm
super
still wearing my Angular t-shirt.
Yeah.
there you go. Never truly leave it, right?
Once
All
you're
right.
on the Angular
Thanks
team,
again.
you're never really off the Angular team.
Right.
Yeah.
Awesome. Appreciate it. All right. That's a wrap. Thanks, everyone. Have a good one. See ya.
Thank you.